Hello, advertisers, and welcome to another episode of the AdQuick Madvertising podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of content, culture, creativity, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a special guest. We have Paul Millard. He's a writer, speaker, author of The Pathless Path, which we're going to talk a lot about, where he explores alternative approaches to work, fulfillment outside of the traditional career path. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm here mostly looking for better ways to advertise my books.
Well, this is a great audience because for twofold. One, there's definitely a lot of people who are probably great advertisers and creatives, but want out of the corporate world. It's definitely not for everyone all of the time. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, because a lot of people I think are afraid. I think they have anxiety of what's life like outside working for a big company, even a startup. Like a startup is more entrepreneurial, but what you're talking about is even a step beyond that, where you're sort of mapping your own life, your own financial situation, your own journey. And so I think this is an exciting audience for you to talk to.
I think for me, what happened is that I'm still it's scary to be on an uncertain path still. I think what flipped for me, though, is I became scared of what might happen if I stayed.
Yeah,
And that that terrified me because I think I had all these like creative impulses and desire for freedom needs that weren't being met. And long enough, it was like, what if I don't leave now? Like, when am I going to leave? And so, yeah, I blew up my life at the age of 33, and 7 years later, here we are.
It's really interesting. So we'll get into your story in just a second, but let's even dial it back further, because I think the Pathless Path is explanatory to me just by the name. But do you want to give the overview of like the book and what that phrase even means?
Yeah, so the pathless path is sort of a phrase I stumbled upon early after quitting my job that gave name to a feeling of not knowing what I was doing, but also simultaneously feeling really excited about continuing to stay on that path. And it sort of became a mantra for me as I got curious about why is it so weird to be on a path like this? What do other people think about work? And starting to have this conversation. And so from 2017 to 2020, I really flipped my life around to follow my curiosity. I lowered my cost of living down to probably about anywhere between 15 to 25 grand a year for about 3 years, and devoted as much time as possible basically hanging out online, reading, researching, talking to people, and writing a lot. And it was pretty wild because I think what I discovered is work is this topic that people sort of talk in hush tones, but there's not a good like public conversation about it. And I was sort of like pissed off at all the famous and popular future of work writers that I didn't think their work was that interesting. And I didn't think it went deep enough. And I wanted to basically write to fill that need. And basically, it's like a permission slip to myself to keep going. And so the pandemic hit 2020. Suddenly, all around the world, everyone is told to stay home. Couple weeks later, people are having existential crises and they start Googling what the hell is going on with work. And like people are stumbling across my website from all over the world. And so I started having conversations with people every week. I had these curiosity conversations every Wednesday. My calendar was just open. And some weeks I'd have 8 calls and people would just dump everything to me. And that year was really this magical explosion of conversations, writing, reflection, sharing over and over and over again. And by the end of the year, it was like, ooh, I need to put this into a book.
And so I guess I'll ask a few questions, because a lot of advertisers listening to this and a lot of our users, some of them are going to be corporate careerists, but certainly a percentage of them
Yeah.
daydream of doing the pathless path and striking out on their own, whether that means being their own, a freelance consultant, whether that means being a blogger or vlogger, whether that means, creating an e-commerce store, who knows? What would you say are, I guess, because you talk to a lot of people, what are some of the indicators that you're ready to go from just thinking about this and having it be a daydream to, okay, I should have sense of urgency. Now is kind of the time.
Yeah. So what I've found is if you're somebody that's sort of annoyed by what I'm saying right now, it's probably not for you. Like you shouldn't follow my path. You should find other people that inspire you. Also, people that are like, well, you can do this because of X. Also, this path probably not for you. But what I've found is the people that are like really excited when they hear about people who are sharing recipes and approaches and like any sort of hack to figure out how to make a different path work. That was me before I quit my job. But I never sort of mapped my excitement for listening to someone like Derek Sivers on a podcast to me actually being like, oh, I could do a similar path. And so if you have that excitement, uh, that I think is something uh, worth paying attention to. And so it doesn't mean you need to leave your job. It doesn't even mean you ever need to leave your job. It's just really noticing, okay, what is this energy? What is it calling me to do? How do I fit this into my life? And what trade offs am I willing to make that happen? And so my first book is basically all my recipes and like inspirations of how to shift toward that direction. And then my second book, which I put out this year as well, Good Work, is really about the journey of sort of reauthoring my work scripts, going from somebody that left a path and thinking, oh shit, I wasted my career. I'm never going to make money again. And shifting, processing through that, seeing myself as somebody that, like, "Ah, I'm just a bum. I'm just going to write whatever," to now seeing myself as actually being an ambitious person, but I am not ambitious to a senior executive at a company, right? I am ambitious in that I want to be a good father. I want to be a good spouse. I want to commit fully to my craft with writing and be a good friend and all these things. And it's scary being on this path, but for me, it's like I'm just the kind of person that I have to figure it out on my own. I want to explore the unknown. I want to be challenged in different ways.
And so, it's interesting because I think what's changed is a lot of the economics of making a living online. It used to be like getting blood from a rock, for example, with blogging, running AdSense on your site. And I had
Yeah.
a reasonably popular site that was making, maybe $1,000 a month with like, 300,000 visits to it, which is a lot. So I was looking at economics and I was like, oh, this wouldn't be able to afford my lifestyle. But I think that's changed with people being used to paying for like a Substack or a Patreon subscription. And so I think one thing that when I talk to people who've been around a while, that maybe young people don't suffer from this, is the economics of it are really bad, but
Yeah.
I think it's changed. I think that if you are really interested in something and you can build a reason for people to follow your tribe and you can get 1,000 true fans, like Seth Godin says, then the market for these things where there's billions of users online, and sure, not all of them are ever going to pay for that type of subscription, but I think for at least when I talk of, I'm like, around 40, when I talk to people around my age, a lot of them are, they have like this model for the internet in their head that is actually, I don't think is true in reality. I think like if you're consistent and you make a case for people to support you financially, I think they will.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing because I think one of my advantages is I grew up with the internet. I think you were similar. Um, I was very online my whole life. And so in high school, I'm doing like banner ad automators, trying to make money running banner ad things and like having a mouse jiggler so it runs while I'm at night. And like, I think that was the first time I made money from the internet. There was also like on eBay, I was selling Beanie Babies. I was also copying DVD or CD ROMs of like Dreamweaver templates and like rebranding them and selling them on eBay. So I've always been fascinated with how to make money online, and I think it's incredibly powerful, not just to make money online, but to actually get paid for something from your own imagination and effort. And so the other side of that is that's been over marketed now, um, maybe by some of your listeners. But yeah, there's this legible idea of the creator economy, and I think sometimes it's a challenge. M- I would urge people just try to make $10 over the next year online from something of your own imagination and creation. But this idea that you can make a middle class income or have a stable path in the creator economy, I think is not a good frame to start with. And I think I was lucky in that I started really publishing and sharing my writing in 2015 to 2018, mostly because it was still harder to make money. Like Stripe just came online in like 2018 in like a useful way to integrate simply and easily with websites. Even when I was starting self-employment in 2017, it was still somewhat tricky. You had to like code up some back-end stuff to make Stripe work on WordPress. Now it is so easy.
Yeah,
And more
I'm a little.
people are doing it, and so there's all this these companies that are coming after these people trying to sell them, yes, you can all can do it, right? So we're being bombarded with branding. But because it was harder when I started, I really committed and embraced this like artist mindset. And
Yeah,
so it was, I need to sustain this journey as long as possible, rather than I need to make money to make it work.
Yeah, I was gonna say, along those lines, I'm like you. I've published to the internet for free since like, probably 1998, and like seriously on my own domains around like 2004. And I think we all got used to contributing as
For
sort of
free, yeah.
digital sharecroppers for free. And I think that the Zoomers are smarter than us. They're charging brands
I
thousands of
know.
dollars for sponsorships of their TikToks. And we were so not capitalist in how we did this. We were almost like in Gen 1 of the internet, like it was almost not at all monetized. And I think that's changing. So I just say that for any young people listening, don't sell yourself short. If you're interested or interesting and you create in a category that a brand is interested in, figure out a fair market value and be compensated for your time.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, right? I think this is something I wrote a lot about in my most recent book is when you find something you really care about, you do want to go to some effort to protect that from the money-making impulse as long as possible. And for me, I sort of realized writing is really satisfying and challenging and rewarding on its own. And there was clearly a path where I could have like done freelance writing and tried to go on as like an editor at one of these like internet adjacent platforms like Quartz or Vox or something like that and write about work. But it was like, I'd rather make money doing something else. There then I can actually write about what I actually think. Like, and this is an important thing if you're going to do any creative work whatsoever. Like, I don't know, most of the writing from like the mainstream on work, I think is empty. It's like empty calorie talk, right? Even, I mean, you share a lot about like remote work. The whole remote work versus in person, absolutely fake. It's a fake um it's a fake debate. There's no debate. Most companies have decided we've now split into a new reality in which there are remote first companies, There are office first companies, and then there's a wide spectrum of companies innovating in the middle, right? And so there's so much space. There was so much space for me to like go deeper, but I knew it would take me a while. And so I tried to protect it from making money as long as possible. And I still don't make like good money from writing. I mostly only make money through selling the books.
Yeah, and we'll add a link at the end of this so readers can check out your books. So I think they'll be really interested to go deeper on a lot of what you're saying. You said something interesting though about not everything being about money, and I totally agree with that. In regards to the remote work discussion, I think you talk in your books and on your blog a lot about quality of life, and to me, the commute just isn't worth it. For even if I was going to get paid however much more money, like that time sitting in traffic there's probably not a dollar value that someone could place on it. And I
Same.
think that, yeah, and I think as a person, once you get to a certain point where it's not even necessarily about financial security, it's more like knowing what's really important to you, and how you want to live your life and how you want to structure that it's so powerful, because once you know that, then you know exactly how to talk to companies, clients, your the list of things that you want, and you can have really direct conversations with people.
Yeah, and I think for me, so I think the reason people have resonated so much with my writing is that I was actually very deep in the default path. And so I was working full time for about 10 years. I went to business school to help accelerate that path. And I was I was commuting most days. Now, my commute was on a subway, which I far prefer to a car. But I far prefer like a bike or a walk and under 10 minutes if I deal with a commute. But I didn't actually imagine any other possibilities for my life. It was sort of it's this algorithm of, well, you're in a job, so you should stay in a job. And then, oh, now you're getting an offer for another job. And oh, it's $10,000 more than you make now. And suddenly, like everything in your brain fires and is like, all right, shut down the body. Don't let the body know it's trying to do anything else. We just got a raise. We must submit to this new path, right? And then you go in the next thing and you're sort of like, well, I'm in a job. I might as well stay in a job. And it was sort of shocking how long I kept just like running that algorithm. I did 5 jobs in 10 years, including a 2-year break for business school. And yeah, it's really fascinating to know now, 7.5 years into this new path, how much more degrees of freedom I actually had, but I didn't actually realize.
So you've talked to a lot of people about, I think for young people in particular, there's quite a bit of societal pressure for them to follow the default path, and you
Yeah.
know take the more money thing, or maybe not pursue their dream, or even just pursue like a startup, right? That's like a hard thing to do. um how do you help advise young people to sort of not succumb to the pressure of a parent or the friends who are like, no, you can't do that, that's too crazy?
So I think this comes down to interrogating work scripts. Most of us have silently running in the back of our heads, sort of like a software program, a script that's telling us what we're supposed to be doing in life, right? One of the scripts I grew up with was that like work is somewhat painful. You have to tolerate it. So you might as well try and get paid well. Another was get good grades so you can get the good job. And once you have the good job, like dot, 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 there wasn't really any script past that. Another script was like try and make as much money as possible. That's how you prove you're a good person. Another is being employed is a way of proving you're like doing your part in the world. And so I had to really interrogate these when basically did the opposite of them after quitting my job. And I realized these scripts often start with really important wisdom, right? Put your head down, do your duty. That is really useful and helpful if you're in like working in a factory in the 1950s and that's your only option, right? Super useful. Not super useful if you have like technology skills, love to use the internet, like understand different languages, have like things you're interested in that other people are interested in online. And so it's really about finding off ramps from these scripts and authoring new scripts, right? I think like our parents want us to be safe, and they're coming from that place of wisdom, like more or less. Like I would say my friends who are in high wage, stable jobs and committed to that path are a bit more stable than my underemployed, self employed friends. Right. And so I think what people are hinting at is hey, do this path and that will help you live a more stable life. That is true. But also for someone like me, I had this intense desire to be creative, have more freedom. It wasn't the right path for me after a number of years. And so I still think it's incredibly valuable to go into some of these careers like consulting, banking, finance, even just a big corporation, because it gives you a sense of discipline and forces you to develop certain skills, people skills, even just learning how to get stuff done. But if you're the kind of person that desires this intense freedom or creative paths or experimentation or leading things, like you need to pre-design an off ramp before you go into those paths.
Yeah, I learned in big company life that big companies aren't for me. I want to be at a startup. I want to be
Right.
building the machine. I don't want to have meetings about meetings. I just want to work and ship cool projects. And I think it's important. Like you said, I had to go and I worked at Google for 7 years. I had to learn that and get frustrated enough days and basically get to the point where I'm like, okay, I've ridden this ride. I know it's not for me. So but it was valuable, right? I mean, you get to know what is not for you, and now you have no FOMO. Now you can say, look, I might not be making as much money, but my happiness is like 10x, and that's worth way more. We all know plenty of very wealthy people that are just miserable all the time, and who wants to live like that?
Yeah, it's I think I have this thing called the accidental meaning hypothesis. And I think previous generations mistook their consumer and lifestyle choices as the reason for their meaning, right? So, stable job, house, nice car, upgrade the house when you make more money. That was proof that that was sort of like the formula for a good life. And I think the reason that worked more for previous generations is that every single person was either aiming at it or agreed that it was the right path, right? And so it also worked. There was this enormous economic tailwind called the Great Boom right after World War II in developed nations and even other nations that were growing so rapidly, where like you just sort of floated by and everything got better. Right. I do think there's been a real stagnation in our economy. Like I would probably side with Tyler Cowen's view of the great stagnation. And I think we've financialized a lot. We've abstracted a lot of work to these very weird laptop jobs. And um, people's expectations are higher than ever. And so, like, people are aiming at what they think is the good life, but it's either much harder to aim at or um, the actual work you need to do doesn't actually lead to the meaning, right? Or it undermines the meaning, right? Just show up at a job and just like put your head down and trust the system, play the game, often leads to discontent and disillusionment for people. And people don't really have good explanations of why that is. And so that's sort of something I've been exploring steadily over the past years.
Yeah, totally. I love that, and I think Tyler's right as well. So let's shift gears a little bit because I know you'll have a fun take on this. Something that I've seen quite a concerning trend of is just the steadily increase in hustle culture online, and basically everyone worshiping at the altar of productivity. I see people flexing that they're working like through every weekend, that they're working over the holidays. It's kind of comes from not even just tech and VCs. It's also in banking. It's also in indiepreneurs or indie entrepreneurs, however you want to say that. And it's like pretty concerning to me. I guess, do you have any advice for people who may be drinking from the hustle culture Kool-Aid? Does it end well for them? What can they do to extract themselves? Or are they just sort of going to have to burn out and figure it out?
Yeah. I think more broadly in society, we've sort of like fractured into 100 different reality tunnels. And for better or worse, um, that often means like the actual tunnels people opt into are much more radical. And so work has become this thing in which people are trying to fill like their god-shaped hole, and they just go all in, right? And so I think hustle culture is really exciting because often for a time it aligns with people actually pushing themselves and growing and challenging themselves. I think, however, I've seen so many people burn out. And it's often not the unsustainable pace, it's the misalignment with setting up your life oriented toward things you actually care about. Right. And so when you're grinding on Facebook ads, right, for 20 hours a week, that and like writing marketing copy and like trying to build a product and trying to do all these posts for social media, that might actually really be really exciting and fulfilling for a while as you're learning new skills and like, oh, this is interesting. But once it just becomes an end in itself of, or a means to an end, I meant there, of like making more money, you're just like putting in random work on a computer. And so you're not actually tied to anything you ultimately care about. And so the other reason why does this exist? Um, I think it's just this like thing that sells. It works. Like I'm grinding, I struggled so hard. It gets clicks. It sells, right? Have you seen this clip of Jensen Huang talking about how he suffered when he was young? Got shared like crazy, right? Have you ever read the articles about how he describes his work as like his life's work? It feels like play. It's filled with joy. Have you read those articles or
I
seen them
have,
shared
yeah.
widely?
Yeah.
Well, you've read more widely than most, but they don't really get shared that much, right?
Yeah.
The like, oh, I struggled, pain. It's all like male virtue signaling,
That's a great way to put it.
right? It's insecure men who are like need to validate why they've achieved some sort of like prominence. It's always like VCs who are like insecure about the like probabilistic nature of their outcomes. And it's like, look at how hard they're talking about. This is what young people have to understand. Here's the thing. If you have enough suffering in your life, you will not succeed. You will literally like you will struggle to do anything in life. Suffering does not lead to success. Success occurs despite suffering. right,
I,
right? And so what you have is successful people who have succeeded despite the barriers they have faced, not because of the barriers they have faced, right? And as we've become a more prosperous world, what has happened? Less people have suffered and more people have succeeded. And that will continue to happen. Like, we shouldn't introduce more struggle and suffering into the system.
I love that. And I think if you ever do see your point about like VCs sitting on Twitter worried about their bets because they basically just have to watch everything, it is interesting, especially as cycles come and go. You can kind of track the sentiment in certain sectors as things play out. For me as a marketer and like an amateur sociologist is like fascinating behavior, right? Like I'm watching like, you know, like the nature channel kind of. So,
Yeah,
so
and
go ahead.
I would add on that. I think there's deeper nuance beneath it too. So this is something I talk about in the recent book. I call it like good hard and bad hard. And so like bad hard would be me like, oh, I'm going to write my book with one hand. That's just stupid, right? But good hard for me actually is writing a book. Writing a book is insane. It's not super practical in terms of financial outcomes. It's really challenging. It's really intense, but it's sort of a hard that I opt into that I'm like, yeah, this fits with like my vision of like a full life, right? It's like learning any new thing, right? There's an aspect of struggling on it, but you don't want to struggle on things you don't care about, right? This is where, and like maybe at the beginning of a career, you do want to like push that a little further on struggling things you don't care about. But actually, you don't want to push that too far because the worst thing that can ever happen is you run out of actual caring, like, and you just become this cynical person that struggles to care about anything. Like, that's a really bad state. You don't want to end up on that state.
Totally. I have kind of a different question for you. I read a tweet today about a fellow who was, 34. He had plenty of money from his job at Amazon. He's married with kids, and
I
he was
saw
kind
this.
yeah, he was, and basically he was bored with life. And I know a lot of people like this. I don't have this problem. I have too many hobbies and need to probably cull
Same.
some. But what do you think we should tell young people? How do we get young people to have hobbies and passions again, perhaps ones that they don't monetize? Like, how do we get them interested in that? And then probably the harder question, you probably can't answer this one, maybe you can, is what should their interest be in, like, the world of AI? You can take this one any direction you want.
Yeah. So my definition of work is very vast and broad. It's basically things worth doing. And so I think we have a problem with how we think about work, and it sort of like undermines true passion in the world. And so we see work as something that generates money, right? And everything has become work, right? We work on our marriage, we work on our side gigs. And like everyone only looks at things as worth doing if it generates money or generates status or generates some outcome, right? And so it's really broadening your definition of work as basically things worth doing. And I've actually found immense satisfaction in my life from basically reorienting my life so I could spend a majority of my time doing an unpaid hobby, which was writing. Now, I did have a sense that maybe I could make money in the future, but honestly, the outcomes I've had now are like far beyond what I ever expected. But I would still be doing this despite that because it's so satisfying, it's so rewarding. And so I didn't actually stumble upon this mindset shift or an awareness of my actual connection with the activities until I created space in my life. And I think this is the biggest thing missing in most people's life is that they've never paused in their entire life. They've been in an institutional conveyor belt, right? First grade, second grade, third grade, all the way to high school. And then you're graduating from high school, and then you transfer to another institution, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Then you transfer, you're a freshman in the economy, right? You're in a safe big corporation, and you've never actually just experienced what 3 months is like without any expectations, a sense of lightness, and ability to reconnect with yourself. And so that is when I experienced um, a shift in how I thought about all of this. And honestly, I don't know how to get there without that. And this is why I think taking a sabbatical is literally one of the most important things you can do in your life, right? It's not saving for your dream home, which many people can accomplish. It's literally creating 3 months to reflect on your life and what really matters sometime after you start your career.
I agree. And a part of that that's kind of funny is there's nothing HR people hate more than when you take a sabbatical and go back. They want you to explain why you weren't working during that time. That question will 100% get asked. And it's so funny to me because I don't know if it's some psyop by companies where it's like, why would you ever not be working? It just kind of breaks their brains.
No, I think it's just HR is police and they're just looking for rules to enforce. And the easiest rule is you should always stay employed. And so Andre Gores had a really fascinating write up of this. He was a sociologist, more left leaning, like this sort of left leaning doesn't even exist anymore. And he sort of argued that we live in this wage based reality. And so, how do you prove you are a member of a wage-based society? Formal employment. Literally nothing else counts, right? So if you do take a sabbatical, you do take a break, you do become self-employed, you literally don't become a member. You're not a member of the society anymore, right? And I think his frame is very persuasive, and it sort of helps explain like why people look at people that take breaks or seek sabbaticals as like crazy. Oh, why would you do this? What are you doing? Right? Everyone's a little insecure about their place as a member of the society. And so yeah, I'm happy to like try and push the Overton window a little on this because it's yeah, I don't think it's natural to work continuously in adulthood. Like if you're going to work 500 months in adulthood, which is like a 42-year career. That's a 3-month break is less than 1% of a working life. This is not a big deal. And it
Yeah,
might radically reshape what you think is possible. It might help you discover forgotten hobbies, and it might enable you to be far more ambitious than you ever imagined.
I agree fully. I took a year off after the pandemic, and thankfully, because of the internet, I started working again without having to
Nice.
apply for jobs. The current team I'm at saw that I was tweeting on Monday one day and was like, "What are you doing? You want to come work for us?" So
Nice.
the internet is potent. You can go around, trying to apply for jobs if you want. So Paul, this has been a great discussion. Can you share where our readers can connect with you? And we'll put links in the episode description. But for our listeners on Spotify and Apple who aren't watching video.
Yeah, all my links are on pmillard.com. And yeah, you can find links to both my books there. You can also just search Paul Millard literally anywhere on the internet. I'm the only one really with that name. So yeah. And yeah, look, I love hearing from people. Send me emails, paul at pathlesspath.com, and rooting for anyone doing bold things in their work lives.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us on the show this week, Paul. And stay tuned, listeners. We'll have a new episode for you next week.